Hello, everybody, and welcome to Defend. The title for our webinar today is The Needle in the Fraud Tech Stack, Fraud Choices for the Bank of the Future. My name is Jonathan Kerr, and I'll be your host today. And with me, I have some stellar panelists. I'm very excited to welcome Maxim Spivakovsk, Senior Director for Global Payments Risk Management at Galileo, Krithika Ramados, who's a VP for Risk Strategy at Bill.com, and Steve Knopf, who's VP of Product at DataVisor. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining. It's a pleasure. So today, as I say, the title of the webinar, what we're going to discuss is the needle in the fraud haystack. So let's, without further ado, move in. I put a couple of topics that I thought would be interesting for us to talk about today. And the first one being fraud trends in 2023, what we as industry professionals are expecting, and what tools and technologies we feel are important to fight the fraud risk with agility. Second one is how to control the risk of managing fraud with constrained resources, because here in the real world, we're all constrained in our resources. And finally, how to identify the right fraud stack for your fraud needs. So let's move in on this first topic. Before we start, I'd like to run a poll, and this is for the audience out there. What fraud types do you see continuing to rise as serious threats in 2023? Authorized push payment scams, ATO and unauthorized transactions, or first-party fraud? And if you can possibly fill that in, I'll just give you a couple of minutes or so to enter your choices there. That would be much appreciated. And I've also just turned off the beeps that were interfering with the webinar. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's move into that first question. Fraud trends in 2023 and the tools and technologies to fight them with agility. And if I can turn to you first, please, Krithika. What trends do you see upcoming in 2023 that we should all be aware of?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. So I think on the B2B side, on the B2B payments, business to business payment space, the biggest trend that we are seeing is the scam, which is the business email compromise, where I think the businesses the small businesses are not protecting their emails or their other personal identifiable information about the business, which the bad actors are able to get it. And the bad actors pretend to be the business, and they want to be in the center of all the communications that's happening or payments that are happening from business to business. The business payments the payment size is large. So once the bad actor gets to know the information, they can pretend to be or impersonate a business in the middle and try to get the payments that's routed to the business, or they can actually reroute the payments that are happening from a business to another vendor or a business and try to actually get those payments. So that's definitely one of the growing pains in the B2B payment space. Another thing that I would say is the digital adoption generally on the B2B, it falls behind the consumer. First, the consumers, they adopt some of these real-time payments, and then slowly trick the B2B side. So I've seen that in the last decade, more and more decline in the check payments and more use of the real-time payments across the globe. I would say 1/3 of all the payments that's happening on the B2B is happening through the real-time rails. So that poses completely new challenges because the ticket sizes are large and payments are moving in a matter of seconds, even internationally or across the globe. So that poses new challenges, new types of payment fraud, that happens because the bad actors know that once they either take over the account or once they successfully do a scam onto a business, then I think they'll actually be able to take the payments in real time. So I think those are the three types of fraud, I would say, to summarize: the business email compromise that's on the rise, and I would say the identity theft, because they could easily get the identity of the business. And the last is our familiar account takeover, because once they take over these business accounts, then they know that the payments goes really fast.
Well, that's fascinating. And I think you're right. As you say, it's it's a very happy place for a fraudster if they can get themselves into the supply chain. And yeah, as you say, you've got numerous case studies, both both privately and obviously in the press, about how this happens in real estate, in, as you say, in the business supply chain, and I've seen it even in education sector, as well as where we might think of traditional manufacturing supply. So Max, if I can turn to you, what trends do you see as upcoming in 2023?
Absolutely. I just want to echo on what Kritika said. On the B2B space, obviously the business email compromise, it's a major problem that not just the B2B space sees, but also major financial institutions involved with B2B as well. Around direct and indirect fraud, it's a challenge that a lot of companies are trying to attempting to solve at the moment through newer technology, language processing, and so on and so forth. Account takeover. If I had to look at both B2B and B2C space, account takeover, primarily over the last couple of years, given that everyone tried to move more towards the digital space, becomes a major challenge, as well as it becomes a challenge when we're looking at account takeover only from the perspective of a single customer, without naming names, right? But we would like to know those learnings that are coming from other customers as well. Synthetic ID, I think, as again, as we move towards a more digital environment and we don't have to go to the branches anymore, as a simple example, how easy for us is to generate synthetics. Somebody can pretend to be Max with using a different address. It creates a record on all the databases that we are currently leveraging, right? So it becomes like a very simple type of process or project just to generate those in bulks and apply on multiple platforms, or leveraging the same platform with multiple applications. Unfortunately, there's no exact science behind the solution to each one of them, right? But as we're thinking about how we should address those, there are several methodologies that we probably will be touching on in the future, but I think those are the main trends that we're experiencing both in the B2B and B2C space at the moment.
That's really interesting. So I think that's a quite insightful, and you say it's something which I know a lot of cybersecurity professionals across the space, not just in fraud, are actually thinking about really carefully. How do we make sure that identity is as robust as it can be? As you say, synthetic identity is not is not something that is easily solved. So, Steve, if I can turn to you, I think we've heard sort of the problems that the industry are experiencing and expecting in 2023. I guess the question that I'd like to ask you is, what can we do about it? I mean, this is something that can be solved. So, what can we do? What tools and technologies can we do to agilely respond to these problems?
Yeah, so that's a question I got asked quite a bit at previous companies where I was head of fraud or tasked with slowing down fraud. Is what can we do about it? The real answer is there's no silver bullet. There's not one thing or one tool, one service we can bring in that will stop it entirely, but it's more of an ensemble approach. So real time is clearly a big need. Models, both unsupervised models and supervised machine learning models help. A decisioning platform that can leverage those models your features, your data attributes, and able to sort of construct a decisioning platform that will leverage sort of the right tools for the right time and the right checkpoint of where the fraud is taking place. That, to me, having as many tools in your toolbox as you can get, so that when it comes, when you see a certain fraud outbreak, or when you see certain fraud trends increasing, you can go to that toolbox and dial up your detection, or dial up your whatever you have, whether it's authentication, detection, or any of those things to sort of slow the fraudsters down and keep them at bay. That's probably your best strategy, and from my experience, that's what's worked most effectively for me.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Krithika, if I can ask you again, because as you're right at the front of the fight, so you obviously talked about the problems that you see. What's the typical sort of response process for you and your team when you see these kind of waves of attacks coming in? What's the process there in Bill.com?
Yeah. Like any fintech companies will have to have like multiple layers of protection, right? Like I think Steve rightly pointed out, there's no single silver bullet that will have that'll solve all of the things that we need, right? So it's a multi-pronged approach, right? I think Steve called out some of the key capabilities. I think you need a foundational capabilities to actually mitigate fraud, whether it's any different vectors that you see, because the vectors will keep changing, the tactics will keep changing. However, there are some foundational things that we need to have in order to actually mitigate fraud. And one of the core things, if we see from where we were maybe a decade ago in the B2B payment space to where we are now, I think machine learning models play a key role, right? Whether you screen the customer during the onboarding, you need to know who they are, what type of payments they make, what is the business that they are in, and have a mechanism to screen every single payment that is being made through the ecosystem. That to me is a foundational capability that you need. Of course, you need a lot of supporting things for this foundational engine, right? Which is more about having ability to do complex computations, right? Especially with real-time payments, I think you need different set of attributes to be computed. You need to know, right, like different things in order to actually make a real-time decision. So that's really a complex computation engine, but that can perform and scale at the volume that we are seeing. Because fraudsters, when they come in and they want to attack, whether it is account takeover, it's going to come in like they want to bombard the system, because they know that I think the system needs to perform like, or there might be like failover mechanisms that we may have in the system. They want to really like break the system and then may see that if they can push through some of their payments or some of their transactions that they are running through during that time when the system is trained, right? Because there might be other alternate process that we may be running. So we need to actually design the systems that we are putting to function at 5x or 10x the volume that you will be expecting, so that the system can perform during all these bad payments that are coming in. Of course, we need to have like a real-time decisioning workflow that will help us to adapt to all these new patterns that we are seeing. Hey, I'm seeing a wave of business email compromise, right? What are some of the key patterns that I'm seeing in that tactic, right? And if my model is not able to catch it, I need a fallback mechanism to create a rule decisioning workflow. Of course, all the different, I totally agree with Steve that we need all the different, indicators. In the past, one indicator might have worked really the best, such as device intelligence or email intelligence or phone intelligence. Those one single attribute might have worked really best in the past, but right now it's just a combination of all of these, because in different tactics we see one indicator coming in much more significantly better differentiation power than the other indicator. So you need a model that can consume these indicators. One thing that we have seen that's really growing to have like strong influence is the behavior. Bad actors can get identity. Bad actors can get information. They can get the device. They can also get a good valid Gmail or a corporate email like us. They can influence all of this. But what is different from a good behavior versus a bad behavior is how they interact in the platform. So we definitely see that is continuing to prove some differentiation power and value, because we know how our customers interact, because they have established how they interact. And when the bad actors come in, I think they definitely behave different. So the behavior is also another key differentiator that we see is adding value in fighting these different type of fraud vectors.
I think that's very interesting, very insightful. One of the things I was surprised about is when we first saw these kind of business email compromise attacks, we thought we fix it with being able to detect fake emails and fake domains and so on, and how wrong we were. Because obviously attackers go, well, that's fine, we'll just go and hack into a real email account. And as you then got the question is, what's the reputation of this email account? I know that's something that I believe is baked into the platform. Maxime, if I can turn to you, something that Kritika said, which I thought was very interesting, is we're really at the point where we've been at the point for some time where we need these machine learning models. Would you agree with that? I mean, is it something you say is essential now?
It is essential. It is critical, and it has to come as a supplement to our methodologies that we implement. Machine learning model, but just by itself, is not something that will be able to address all the problems that we are facing. We need to look at full suite of products. We need to look at full suite of solutions available to us. It can be supplemented with some type of static rules, with the dynamic rules. If you look at the entire ecosystem of fraud, both in B2B and the B2P and B2C space, we always have to consider a customer experience versus what exactly the friction we are probably generating for a specific client. So whenever we're thinking about models, we all know that what is our false positive rate, right? What is our capture rate? What is our hit rate? Those things varies from clients, they vary from industries, and they vary from based on the fraud vectors. Even before we start the entire journey of implementing models, one of the things that we have to start thinking as pretty much as our paramount for fighting fraud is we must have a real-time and proper controls around robust monitoring. We need to have a proper real-time alerting, not just on the specific fraud patterns, but even something that we might consider fraudulent and we would like to investigate for future references, right? We need to have a very robust mechanism of time to implementation. Like all of those initial controls, they become almost like a paramount for a proper fraud mechanism, if you think about it, right? The moment we establish those methodologies, this is where the next step would be, where we can start thinking about models. We can generate unsupervised machine learning models, and so on and so forth, right? But again, the problem is, in some cases, how frequently we can retrain the model. Can those models, or can the patterns that this model identified, can those be detected by the bad actors? And the question is, probably the next evolution of the modeling should be a dynamic vectors. If you think about it, like we don't want to restrict, I'll give you just a simple example. We don't want to restrict a spend pattern of, let's say, more than $500. Because at some point, the bad actors, they will figure it out. The fraudsters will always figure this thing out. the model will always at some point start scoring transactions beyond 2 or 3 or 4 transactions, that's whatever patterns, it will start scoring at a higher threshold. So therefore, the fraudsters will figure out when they can start the attack, right? So we should be thinking more around dynamic capabilities. We should think more around capabilities of preemptive alerting, as well as the operational needs. The moment we have all of those, how now we generate this unnecessary friction, how we mitigate this unnecessary friction with our clients, right? So models are definitely there, but it's not the only factor that should be considered.
And I think, yeah, the idea of static thresholds again is probably another ship that sailed. In that, as you say, we know our adversaries have learned how to fly under that particular radar. I think the other thing that's also interesting, as you say, is and something I'm starting to see is advanced adversaries are using their own machine learning tools to again work out exactly what the behavior of our models is, and then try and outwit it. So it's certainly certainly fascinating. If I may, I'm going to move on to question 2 in the poll. And again, for our audience, we really like to know where you spend most of your fraud prevention budget. And single choice, so either it's fraud detection, reducing customer friction, updating platform to catch new fraud types, or adding new tools. I really feel I ought to have some hold music playing at this point, but in the absence of that, just give a couple of seconds there. And I think it's, as I say, this is one of the reasons why this field is so fascinating to work in, because the landscape in which we're operating is constantly changing. Our adversaries are constantly thinking up new ways of doing their stuff. We're no longer, as you say, it's no longer enough to say, well, all we care about is the payments channel. As Krithika pointed out, email lineage and history becomes an important set of data points. With that, then we're now also looking, as you say, at the overall behavior of the consumer or the end user. And I thought Maxim's point about friction was really interesting, because I think there's a concept of the right amount of friction, and certainly some of the consumer studies I've seen say that if we have something that is too frictionless, it actually makes consumers a little bit nervous, because they think, are our accounts properly protected? Are our funds properly protected? So there's certainly that idea, the right amount of friction, to make our customers feel protected, but also, of course, when we go over that, then we get into the stage of having a user experience that is unpleasant. So I'd like, if I may, to move on to the next topic. I would say in 2023, we're all battling with constrained resources. As one of the politicians in the UK famously said a while back, there is no magic money tree. So again, I think Maxime, if I may, I'll turn to you first this time. How do you control the cost of managing fraud and balance this against the fact that we're operating in a real world where money is not infinite?
It almost constantly becomes a cost benefit analysis kind of an exercise. It's a continuous fraud fighting against what additional benefits I can draw from a specific tool, from a specific methodology, all the way to the level of what if I added another individual of reviewing some of those fraudulent transactions, events, customer onboardings. Again, there's no silver bullet in this space as well. It all comes to the point where we have to make priorities, what we think is more applicable. And Galileo is a little bit unique use case here, because we are in the position to serve multiple clients. So as a solution provider, we have to consider various type of client spaces, client domains, B2B, B2C, and so on. So our approach is what the right investment for us to perform in order to reduce the fraud. And this is primarily around, again, the customer friction. if we invested in tool A and B, how I can will I get a better resolution? Will I get the better detection compared to the others? With that being said, obviously there is a constant requirement to enhance some of our existing processes, right? So when we're thinking about the cost, it's not just the investment in the new capabilities, it's a continuous investment in our own people, by the way, as well as our existing processes, make them more robust. And as I said, a continuous cost-benefit analysis of what else we can bring to our entire ecosystem of payments to make the detection much better, much easier. I would be surprised if we will able to find a silver bullet to this to the resource allocation problem. But we're all thriving, just to get to things that we think will be better models, continuous enhancements, right? If you think about the cost allocation to this compared to embedding a new capability, it's relatively much cheaper, right? So we should be considering this as our initial stage, and then we should be considering embedding a few more solutions to the tool.
That makes that makes a lot of sense. And I've seen some interesting ideas out there, including using these models to actually predict, whatever the constraint is, whether the constraint is people, whether the constraint is, as you say, from a service level. We know we cannot accept, a level of false positive higher or lower than this, and so on. And then obviously
Exactly.
you can then use that, so you can then model what resources are needed. And as you say, you end up finding out what you want versus what you can actually afford. Krithika, if I may, I think you've got some quite interesting thoughts on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Max that I think it all eventually boils down to cost benefit analysis and where is the biggest bang for the buck, right? Like where you want to actually spend to control your fraud. So there is no single silver bullet where I think we can just prioritize one over the other. One thing that I would say is I won't look at fraud as a standalone entity, because sometimes I think the cost of not investing on the technology to resolve it at a larger scale will slow down the company's ability or the fintech's ability to innovate and move faster, right? If we are actually going to have like a baggage on building your fraud risk platform, that's going to in the long run hinder the company to actually innovate and grow faster. And even from my past experience, I think there has been like direct correlation. I think it'll take a longer time for you to catch up and build if you have like a longer tech debts on the platform capabilities in itself. So I would say that I think the way we can look at cost of managing the fraud is having a short-term vision and a long-term vision, right? So whatever that you're doing to actually build it, slow and steady, either you're thinking about an in-house platform because I think you process like billions of dollars of payments, or you are outsourcing it to a key technology vendor, right? What you need is the flexibility to tune the way that you need, so that risk or fraud does not become a big hindrance for your product or whatever that you're looking at to actually launch, right? Classic example is the way the B2B payments were in a decade back to where we are right now. The innovation in the real-time payments is going faster. Buy now, pay me later kind of products and services are being offered, right? So there is like financing needs, there is like credit assessment, there is fraud assessment that happens on that type of product. So if you do not have the fundamental capability, and if you've kept on patching with, let's say, solving the fraud need by either applying rules or models or manual review, I think that's not going to scale to the new innovation and new products that you need. So I feel that some level of fundamental investment is required, whether you're thinking about in-house or third-party technology services that are available these days to provide risk as a service. I think that kind of fundamental investment is required. Whether you do it like how you prioritize with the limited amount of engineers that you have right now. So always there is that cost of, hey, I missed this short-term gain versus I wait and use my resources for X number of time so that I have this platform capability that'll help me to run faster later, right? Like it's like a marathon, right? Like it doesn't matter like how fast you run in the beginning of that marathon, right? You need to sustain, you need to scale. So that level of thought and investment and education is required. As risk professionals, I think we need to educate the leaders in the company to understand and appreciate that investment so that you can turn the risk as a competitive advantage for your company when you want to innovate and grow faster. So I think there is that short-term cost-benefit analysis, and in the long term, think of how you can actually turn risk as a competitive advantage for the innovation that your company wants to do. Is my approach and my thought. Yeah.
Well, that's very helpful, and I think it's very interesting, isn't it, that I've said for a while that we are, as fraud fighters, we're coming out of the back office, because actually, not only are we, as Maxim said, we are governing the user experience through controlling how frictional it is, but we also, of course, we're also governing the risk appetite of the organization. And indeed, so we can, make the organization more risk embracing, more entrepreneurial, or we can, as you say, we can limit that, depending on business need, of course. And what also came out, obviously, with Galileo serving many financial institutions, obviously Bill.com. I think I'm a happy customer. I'm somewhere in your supply chain, in Bill.com as well, like half the planet.
Thank you.
The interesting thing, I think, is what that tells us is that everybody's risk appetite and risk tolerance is different. And so the question, Steve, I'd put to you is, you've obviously got customers who are saying, well, we have not just one risk appetite or risk tolerance, we may have a range, or we may need to flex and apply different risk appetite, different risk tolerance to customers depending on our customers' needs. So individual financial institutions or different clients of Bill.com. And I guess the question there, Steve, is when you're in your VP of product role, how do you sort of take those requirements and how do you bring those into reality?
Yeah, so one way we would recommend doing that is to try different strategies and test out different solutions. So, if your risk tolerance is X and you want to try to save money from a resource perspective, try to deploy, say you're sending 100% of your volume through one strategy. Try multiple strategies on the same population. So send 1% or 5% through an assumption or a hypothesis that you have that might decrease the cost of that and may increase the fraud tolerance or may decrease it, right? But the point is, try a bunch of different scenarios, let those play out for a while, and then see which one worked the most, and then move the majority of your volume into the one that did have the most effective outcome for you. So that's one area that I would go think of, or that I would recommend. Another is increases in automation, right? So if you're willing to automate a response if the accuracy is 97%? You know, are you willing to go down to 96 or 95? And what would that do to your business or your bottom line? And to try that out. The other thing that we talked about sort of on the last question is, you know, we're not the only ones that are financially constrained. The fraudsters are financially constrained as well. So they're trying to make money as cheaply as possible off us, off the good guys. And so, you know, if you can implement solutions and try out different strategies that raise the cost to them of doing business on your application or your website or with your business, then, you know, there's a good chance that they'll leave or that they'll spend less of their financial resources attacking you and they'll go somewhere else. So I would, you know, just in terms of trying different things out, you know, nothing's going to last forever either. You know, you try out, you know, you might find a solution that stops, you know, a large amount of your fraud or makes a significant impact, but you've got to keep an eye on that, and you've got to keep, you know, watering it and fertilizing it and taking care of it so that when they do come back and figure out how to attack it again, you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah, I far be it from me to be rude to the credit card companies, but there's those 3 digits on the back of everyone's payment card that they're probably getting close to being a spent force by now. But it's fairly interesting. It's fairly interesting because, as you say, what you touched on is, as defenders, how do we make it uneconomic for fraudsters? That's a really, you know, there's a deep question there. Because, as I say, we're not trying to stop everything. We know there are some people that, for whatever reason, will always try. And I guess if they're determined and resourced enough, a percentage will always get through. We are saying, yeah, where can we bring fraud to a tolerable level?
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, that tolerable level, where we make it economically unfeasible for most fraudsters to attack us. It's a really interesting question, and thank you for that. So I'm going to skip to the next poll, and this one is what is the most useful fraud prevention tool or technique that your firm has implemented recently? And again, this is for our audience. Is it machine learning and AI in all its forms? Is it device intelligence, graphing technologies, behavior intelligence, or something else? And if it's something else, do let us know in the chat what that might be, because it's quite interesting. We see all of these tools and techniques in use. And of course, again, the answer would be, well, we'd like everything, please. But that's not always possible. So we'd really like to know which one is the most useful to you. And I've certainly got a thought here, but I'm very interested to see what the opinions of the pollsters are. Just so you know, for the audience in the background, we're trying something a bit new today. In the background, I've got a DataVisor colleague who is working hard compiling these poll results into answers. And at the end of this webinar, we'll be able to hopefully give you some indication on what's being said. So yes, I'm presenting while my colleague Tori is busy editing. So thank you, Tori, for working so hard in the background. So let's move on to this question, panel. How do we identify that right fraud stack for the fraud needs? And again, you're all very experienced. But Steve, if I can, Steve, if I can ask you, you know, what do you see as sort of the key things when you're putting your product, your value proposition together? What to you is the right fraud stack?
Yeah. So I think, you know, everything you mentioned on that previous question, I think is very valid. The one that came to mind was data, right? So one thing that I think we're seeing, especially in the last, 3 to 5 years, is just, data has always been king, right? It's extremely important to have the right data and to have, lots of different data sources in order to identify fraud, in order to be able to validate or verify the users that are coming through and how risky they are. So I think having a really solid data set, whether it's your own, hopefully it's your own internal data that should be free to you, but as well as other third-party data sources, and trying to come up with sort of what those data points are, and where when your fraudsters do come through and make money off of you, which data points, if you could have stopped it or could have slowed it down. So I think data, to be honest, I think feature engineering is also extremely important. So you have this data, but the data is great, but if you can sort of massage and build that data into other data elements or features, whether they're velocity features, behavioral features, geolocation and distance features, all of those, can play a big role in your models and your decision engine to help you track down fraud more. So I would say, in terms of, what's the right balance, it's hard for me to say what's the right balance. And it really depends on the organization and the business model and sort of what fraud they're seeing. But having the right data, having the feature, the ability to sort of massage that data and then send it through a decisioning platform to do your detections, I think is sort of the foundation of a great fraud stack.
That makes sense to me. And it reminds me, actually, I won't name and shame here, but I was reviewing an analyst report published recently on security analytics, so on the cybersecurity side of the house. Although fraud was a use case they touched on. And they said something which I sort of agree with, but then sort of don't, that real time is where it's at, and secondary analytics and the batch processing is less important nowadays. And of course, well, yes, real time is lovely, and we want real time decisioning, but we also want to be able to train our models and make sure they don't drift. So we kind of need the batch processing as well. But it's really, again, it's really interesting, as you say, the best model is no good without timely, accurate data. And I think that's really interesting. And yeah, certainly something I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about from your product guru space. Maxim, if I may ask you, when you are, building a fraud stack, when you are obviously talking with vendors, when you're talking with your customers and your stakeholders, how do you identify the right fraud stack? And what we're looking at here is, let's say we've got somebody in our audience who has just been given this responsibility, and they're now looking for tips to make them better at their job. So what do they need to do?
So as Steve mentioned, data is a paramount. Without data, we cannot progress, we cannot proceed. At the same time, if I look at some of the potential responses that you provided, we actually should be looking at the entire risk life cycle. Some of those are very heavily related to our client application, client onboarding, how our client interact with our apps. And this is primarily around the device intelligence or biometrical behavior. If I'm looking at graphical representation, this probably would be falling into the domain of the operational risk, operational fraud, and so on and so forth. So we have to first identify the domain itself that we would like to invest, and then start looking at the proper tools. With that being said, obviously everything has to be supported with data and the proper analytics to make sure that obviously we're getting the right benefit from the tool, as well as we are bringing the additional value to our customers. There's no right or wrong answer here. If you're just looking at the transactional piece, if I may split some of those into different domains. If you're looking just at the transactional piece, I would say probably we should start investing into the machine learning models first, right? If I would, the moment I have a proper and robust monitoring controls, it makes the entire life cycle of my operations team easier to investigate what happened post fact. Unfortunately, post fact, it's what we're learning from. So this is where I have to create a holistic picture of the entire cardholder journey, how the cardholder onboarded, how the cardholder interacted with various merchants, how the cardholder interacts with other individuals or entities within ecosystem. And this is where the graphical component comes in place, right? So we have to think from what exactly our current pain point, where we would like to invest. Do we have the sufficient information, data features, which might be applicable to both application, transaction, operational, and so on and so forth, to perform this type of implementation, AI, biometrics, and so on. So it varies. At the same time, another thing that I would like to add is it is also very critical whenever we are implementing any of those solutions to ensure that, and as I mentioned, Galileo is a little bit unique case here because we are a consortium, but it's critical to think of how some of the learnings that I can have from individual customers, individual clients, how can I leverage those learnings for other clients as well? The knowledge sharing, the information, while keeping it anonymized, can be leveraged for mitigating some of the fraud factors within our entire ecosystem, right? So the tool has to be agile enough to be able to absorb multiple learning incidents.
Oh, thank you very much, Maxim. That was a really comprehensive answer. And Krithika, if I may turn to you, and if I can perhaps frame the question a little bit different after Maxim's such a comprehensive answer. So, if you were to choose a real-time decisioning platform, what key factors would you consider, and what key metrics drive that decision process? And I think what's also interesting, again, because I think what really brings this to life is what pitfalls you could anticipate and obviously then evade.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. I think I agree with everything that Max and Steve said, right? Like, I think data is going to be paramount. So now I think pivoting to, if I were to know what my fraud problems are, and I'm embarking on a journey to pick a fraud detection platform, what would I recommend to look at, right? So number one, I would say definitely you're looking for a fraud platform, then you need to ingest data into it, right? So you want to see that platform, the ease of integration of your data into the platform is the paramount. Since data is the king, we want to make sure that I'm able to ingest all different events that I have into this platform, so that then I know that I've given all the data intelligence to the platform, then I can start configuring and using it. So I would say ease of integration for data is number one that I would say. And depending on the size of the business that you're in, right? If you have already invested in developing your own machine learning models, then you want that platform to have that ability to take that data, because there's only so much that you can get from out of the box like, it's really important because you get a lot of advantages of getting the consortium data, getting a holistic view of how it is. But what's also key is using your own customer data to actually build your models about your customer. So I think joining hands with generic model with your custom model, I think having that ability to deploy the models into the platform is also something that I look at. Of course, computations, right? Your models, your risk engine platform, the heart of it is it should be able to compute either in real time or in batch mode, but able to give insights that your models and your platform can use in order to make the decision. Of course, the heart of it for the risk engine is the decision speed, right? It's able to ingest, years worth of customer data. It's able to do all these complex computations. But if it's going to take 2 minutes to make the decision, that's not something that's acceptable. Decision speed is going to be really critical. And I would say the reliability of the platform, right? Like, so how many times can I rely? Like, is it like 99.99999 times that it's actually going to give a response within the set time frame or SLA that we have defined? Those are really the key that I'll be looking into, right? Of course, the key metrics in when you're actually going in to select a platform would be definitely decision speed. Understand the scale of payments. Are you talking about like million payments a day, or are you talking about like 100 payments a day or 1,000 payments a day? I think that makes the whole lot of difference, right? Decision speed is really, really critical. And of course, I think you want to have as much capability as possible. I think Steve was mentioning about ability to have like smaller rules. Don't just like set 100% of your payments to go into your workflow, right? Define A/B workflow, measure, monitor. I think Max also mentioned, like, I think monitoring is really key, right? Monitoring those performance of different flows before you select the keys. So you want to think about all these different capabilities that it can provide. Regarding pitfalls, I think when you embark on a journey to get all these great features, you'll always have trade-off, right? One tool may not provide all the capabilities that you may need, right? Or it may, right? In our case, it did. And one tool may or may not provide all the capabilities. So there'll always be a shortcoming on a tool, or you may need to have like a combination of in-house things that you need to build along with some tools that you can augment in order to do certain things. So always keep that in mind and understand the shortcomings that you may have, or in any of the use cases, and see what is the prioritized list of things that you want. End of the day, it all boils down to what problem you're trying to solve, right? How quick you can solve it. You don't need to build like a big castle in order to solve a small problem, right? So always have that picture in mind, what you're trying to solve and what you're trying to build. And what we are trying to build for our use case may not be the same what Max would use for his customers, or what Steve would recommend for his customers. So I think that's really key, tying into what I think Steve, Max, and Jonathan were explaining about.
That's really very helpful. Thank you, Kritika. And thank you everybody for your great advice today. So for our attendees and registrants, we will be sending out the recording. So I'm glad I put a clean sweater on today. But before we wrap up, we now have the opportunity to get the results of our polls. So let's see. So what did we see? What fraud types do we see continuing to rise as serious threats in 2023? And I can't actually read that.
Steve, I can jump in there, Jonathan.
Sorry,
if you go back...
come to the fore and tell us, please.
Yes. Okay. So if you go to the first question, 41% of our audience poll said it was ATOs and unauthorized tokens. The second was 26% authorized push payment scams. 17% indicated first-party fraud, and 16% indicated check fraud.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff, and thank you for that.
Yes.
So what do you have for our second polling question? We were asking what the most useful fraud prevention tool or technique that the firm has implemented recently.
Yep, the winner was fraud detection at 60%. Oh, are you on poll 3? Let me go to that one. I'm sorry.
I believe I'm on question. Yeah, for some reason I've gone to question 3. Let me go back to question 2. My apologies.
No problem.
I'm too excited with my mouse, obviously. It gets lonely here in the UK, especially in the cold winter months. So what do you spend most of the fraud prevention budget on?
Yep, 60% was fraud detection. 20% was updating the platform to catch new fraud types. 13% was reducing customer friction, and 8% was about adding new tools.
Oh, fascinating stuff. And then turning finally to our third poll question, what's the most useful fraud prevention tool or technique that your firm has implemented recently?
33% of our audience said machine learning and AI. 27% said behavioral intelligence, 21% said device intelligence, 15% said graphing technologies, and 3% said other.
Okay, well, thank you, audience, for contributing to those polls. It's really interesting for us to get this insight into what you're seeing out in the real world as well. And I think before we go, we've got a couple of minutes left. So if I could ask our panel for their closing thoughts, and Steve, if I could turn to you first, please.
Yeah, I think this has been a great discussion. I'm excited to watch was excited to see the poll results and sort of how they played out. And I think, fraud tools, really what it comes down to is the most in my mind, and from my experience, the most effective way to combat fraud is through an ensemble approach, and not putting all of your eggs into one basket, but basically assuring that all the tools and data that you need to attack fraud are there, including asking your customers to authenticate or verify, or give you some pieces of information that help to verify they are who they say they are, or helping to understand better who they are, and then detecting when those customers are doing having historical behavior, and detecting when those customers are sort of behaving out of norms for your customers and for the activity that they're doing. So I think, the things we've talked about, machine learning models, rules engines, decisioning platforms, data and feature engineering are all very critical to this practice overall. And really it's up to each of you and each of us to sort of figure out which priority or which weighting to give each of those scenarios for your specific fraud needs.
Maxime, if I may turn to you on your final take of the day.
Sure. I think one thing we should always remember, that as a fraud fighters, we should be catering for our client needs, and the way we are doing this happens to be by reducing some of the fraudulent activity. So we always should be looking at a bigger picture of how we can generate better goods to the customer by reducing some of the friction. And just to echo on what Steve said, a mechanism to do this thing is by generating features, by implementing machine learning models, looking holistically end-to-end how we would like our customer to proceed with his or her entire journey during the application, spend, customer notifications, and so on and so forth. So different approaches to be taking at different stages. Different stages require different tailored treatments.
That's great. Thank you so much. And if I may turn to you, Krithika, what are your final thoughts for our audience today?
No, thank you. I think this has been a great discussion. And my final thought, I would just say that I think understand your data, like we talked about, and whatever fraud that you're trying to solve, always think about we are trying to actually reduce fraud, but we are also trying to innovate and take your business to the next level. So sometimes we may get bogged down into the cat and mouse game of fighting with bad actors, but we are helping the customers, whether it is consumers or whether it is business. We are protecting them from fraud. We are protecting them from losing money, right? And we need to enable them to do what they are really good at doing. If we are serving small businesses, then let's serve the small businesses to do what they are really good at doing. They are not really good at fighting fraud, but I think we are helping them, or we are protecting them from losing money. So always have that balance between the customer experience and how you're changing the lives of the customers, even as being the fraud fighters, is also an important aspect. Sometimes that we are very heads down working towards fighting fraud. I think we forget that balance. But I would say understand the fraud patterns, that understand the data, understand the pattern, and implement whatever solution that works for you. There's no one single thing that fits for everybody. So your solution has to address the use case that you're trying to solve. So yeah, that's.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, well, panel, Steve, Maxim, Krithika, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you, and I have certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience have. And audience, thank you for your time as well. We really appreciate you taking the time. The purpose of when DataVise are putting these Defend Against events together is to make some advice that is useful, actionable, and things you can take away to help you excel in your job as fraud fighters. So thank you for taking the time. Do let us know what other topics you'd like us to cover. Do let us know how else you'd like us to talk with you, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.